Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're here with Arwen again today. And ducks. You can hear the ducks. But it's a really sunny, beautiful fall day, but it's really, really chilly. There's quite a good chill in the air. We're lucky it didn't snow. So it's cold. Today we are going to talk about parasites again, but this time we're talking about internal parasites. And when we say internal parasites, we're almost always talking about worms. There's a bunch of different types of worms your goat can get. And goats are really susceptible to worms. Okay? Now, to be clear, they've always got some kind of worm load. It's usually low. It needs to stay low. And the reason why we deworm when it gets nasty is because a chronically wormy goat is scrawny, can be rough-coated, anemic, lethargic, really depressed, and they can have really bad diarrhea, and they might even die. Now, obviously, this girl's not scrawny. She's a chunky monkey. Yeah, you're a chunky monkey. Stop chewing. What are you saying, Mom? Yeah, you're a chunky monkey. So she is not chronically wormy. She is dewormed when she needs to be. But if your goat is chronically wormy, you can end up with a dead goat. Okay? Worms kill. So, in order to prevent worms from killing your goat, or from making your goat very ill, or from ducks, ducks are making a lot of noise. But in order for your goat to not be chronically wormy, for them to not die from worms, you have to use the correct dewormer for the worm you're dealing with. So what worms you have in your area differ by area, because where you are, you're probably not going to have the same parasites we do. And the best way to know what's common in your area is actually to talk to your local livestock vet, someone who is in your area. Do not go on Facebook and ask somebody who lives 5 states away from you what worms you should look out for. You want to ask a local livestock vet. They know what's common in your area. So where we are, it can even vary from where I am to a few miles down south, because we're different weather patterns slightly. It's crazy. But we have different parasites and they have just a few miles south of us. So you need to talk to a vet who knows your area. That is really the best way to make sure that you are dealing with a certain type of worm that needs a certain type of dewormer. Not all dewormers are for every single worm. The best way to know what worm your goat has is to run a fecal. This is basically taking the poops, the little poop berries, so you can see, we all know what goat poops look like by now. If you have goats, you know what they look like. So you want to take some of those goat poop berries to your livestock vet and have them actually look at them under a microscope and identify what worm you're dealing with, which parasite you're dealing with, and which dewormer you need. If you're collecting the poops yourself, try to collect them basically right out of the goat. Try to get ones that didn't hit the ground. So yeah, you're going to be following your goat around. It's okay, they poop a lot. It won't take long. And you want to put them in a clean baggie, not a baggie you used for something else. It needs to be a clean little Ziploc baggie, and then take it into your vet or whoever does fecals in your area. Livestock vets do it, but you might also have a university that does it in your area. You might want to contact your county AG office, something like that, find out who runs them. But livestock vets can do it. So if you have a relationship with your livestock vet, you can absolutely get your livestock vet to do it. So take that sample to them. They can look at it, and they can tell you exactly what you're dealing with and what dewormers work. So you want to dose according to weight. This can be problematic if you don't know how much your goat weighs. She weighs about 70 pounds. Okay? She's a small goat. Remember, she's a fainter, purebred fainter, so she actually doesn't weigh that much. So she's a fairly small goat. You can have goats that are a couple 100 pounds. So she's little. So we know she's around 70 pounds. How do you get your goat's weight? Well, if you've got a little goat, you can do it on a bathroom scale. Weigh yourself, then pick your goat up and weigh yourself with your goat. Do the math. That's how much your goat weighs. Larger goats that you can't do that with, you probably need a livestock scale, and you're probably not going to buy one. They're really expensive. If you have a livestock vet, they may have one. Our livestock vet does. That's how we know that Mr. Shadowfax here weighs 220, 225 on a fat day, because we actually had him weighed on the livestock scale at the vet. So we know how much he weighs. We know that she weighs 70 because we did it on a bathroom scale. My son just picked her up. We did the math. She weighs right around 70. I think she weighed 71. Right around there as an adult, because she is a fully fledged adult now at more than 2. So yeah, you need to know how much your goat weighs. If your vet doesn't have a livestock scale, see if another farmer in your area does. So people who do a lot of cattle or do goats in bulk, meat goats especially, they probably have one, or they can tell you who does, because they're often selling by the weight. So they are selling by live weight when they're selling live cattle or live goats or sheep. So they probably have a scale or know where you can find one. So you probably don't want to buy one unless you are large scale, because they are freakishly expensive. So yeah, livestock scale's the way to go. Don't buy one yourself unless you have a real need for it. So the reason weight is so important is because underdosing, so giving too little of the dewormer, is useless. It doesn't actually kill off the worms that you're trying to kill. But overdosing can make your goat sick or even kill them, depending on the dewormer you're using. And the other problem with underdosing, so not giving enough, is you actually create resistant strains. That's why some of the most effective dewormers aren't as effective anymore, because people weren't giving enough. And so the goat or the horse or the sheep or whatever you're deworming wasn't getting enough, so the worms were actually becoming resistant to that dewormer instead of being killed by it. So it's really important to have the correct dosing. And the correct dosing is entirely based on weight. You do want to read the label on all the different dewormers. Get your vet's advice on which dewormer is best for your goat. And don't be surprised if he suggests a wormer that's not actually for goats, because that's what happens with us usually. So with Arwen, we actually use equine dewormers, okay, on the recommendation of our vet. So the same dewormers that he gets, we use for her. We just have to make sure we have the dosing correct, because an equine dewormer is going to have the wrong dosing for a goat. So the package isn't that helpful when it comes to how much to give her. So what we have to do is we talk to our vet and we make sure that we are adjusting appropriately for that dewormer for giving her the horse dewormer, because it's not for goats. It's not uncommon to go off label for goat dewormers, because there's a ton of dewormers that are for like your sheep and your equines, and there's not a ton that are specifically for goats. Okay, there's a couple. There's a Safeguard that's for goats. There's a couple. But don't be surprised if your vet has you go off label. Okay, there's nothing wrong with off label as long as you're doing it correctly. So talk to your vet about dosing, restrictions, cautions, things you need to adjust. Just because it'll be a slightly different dose, just because they don't manufacture them the same. Something manufactured for a horse will be a different concentration than something manufactured for a goat. So double check with your vet before you do anything. I am going to take a moment to touch on natural dewormers like pumpkin seeds. I'm not saying they don't have any value. They do. They're a decent preventative sometimes. However, if you're using natural products, you want to run fecals more often. So we do fecals once a year, just to make sure everyone's under control. If I was doing natural dewormers instead of regular dewormers, I would probably run fecals 4 times a year, just because they're not as effective as a true dewormer. So if you are using a natural product, make sure you are checking more often to make sure your goat is not becoming overloaded with worms. And if they are, so if the pumpkin seeds aren't working anymore because they just have too much of a worm load, you do need to switch to a standard dewormer and administer at the correct dosage at least once. So just because you don't want your goat to get sick and die just because you didn't administer a dewormer. They're relatively inexpensive and you're not administering dewormers every day. So it's not going to cost too much. They are effective if you're using them. Thank you, ducks. Dewormers are absolutely effective as long as you're treating the right parasite with the right dewormer, then you're golden. You're fine. So here's where somebody is going to ask what we use to deworm our goats. So we use ivermectin and Safeguard, which is fenbendazole. I always want to say it wrong, but it's fenbendazole. So we use ivermectin and fenbendazole, and we use the equine version because that's what our vet recommends for our area, and we just adjust the dosing appropriately for her. So those are the two we use because they treat different things, and we have a couple of different types of parasites that are best treated using those two dewormers. There are a couple of other dewormers, ivermectin and fenbendazole. I always want to say it wrong. But those two are the most common, so that's probably what your vet will have you use. But talk to your vet because you probably don't have the same parasites we do. So double check with your vet. One final thing about dewormers. You want to check if you are milking your goats or if you are processing your goats for meat or selling them for meat. Check the dewormers and ask your vet about what's called a withdrawal period. Withdrawal periods are the period of time from which you administered a medication to when you can use that animal for food again. So whether it is using the milk or using the meat, you are going to have to wait a certain amount of time with certain dewormers. Not all dewormers have a withdrawal period, but double check. Especially if you're using that stuff for human consumption, it's really important. And especially if you sell to the public, you have to follow those guidelines. So double check with your vet about withdrawal periods for the products you're using. The withdrawal periods vary from a few days to lifetime. Some products do have a lifetime withdrawal. So double check if you are going to be using that goat for meat or milk. You don't want to use a product that has a lifetime withdrawal. So double check before you use the product. Talk to your vet. Make sure you're using the correct product for your particular type of goat. Because if you have meat goats, what you're going to use will vary from what someone who just has pet goats can use. So just double check. Make sure you're using the correct product for the parasites and for your purposes. That's about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. We'll see you tomorrow.